You know, I started out Anthem giving it a chance. I went in, and I'm not going to say that I really expected a lot, but I gave it a shot. I went to EA, I got Origin Access Premium because I didn't want to get the entire game just in case, and I downloaded Anthem. I believe it was about a week before launch. Gave it a go, and let me tell you, my experience was not good. It was a buggy mess, the story didn't really catch, and in the end I just stopped playing. I completely intended to finish out the game, but because of the story that Anthem presented, I didn't even end up finishing at all. I got stuck at a part that most people seem to have gotten stuck at, gave up and called it a day. That was about 3 months ago. Ever since, I think the reception for Anthem has gotten pretty understood. A lot of people don't like it. There's some defenders that still play the game, I'm not going to say it wasn't some kind of success. I'm sure EA got their money's worth, and I'm sure BioWare certainly got some money's worth. But nobody really came off the game thinking that it was like the next big thing. That's because it really isn't. In the months since release, Anthem has been completely overshadowed by its contemporaries, The Division 2, Destiny 2, Warframe, etc. Why is that? It's just because they offer a better presentation. They offer better gameplay. They offer more compelling experiences. Anthem tried to bring classical BioWare storytelling to a genre that had been well known for its compelling gameplay but lack of a real compelling story, but it completely failed. The story was completely bare bones, and the combat did not pick up the slack in any way. Combine that with performance on PC that makes it feel like a slideshow, and we get what is quite possibly the second worst game BioWare's ever put out. Still gonna have to give number 1 to Andromeda, unfortunately. I'll be breaking this video into 3 parts, focusing on the performance, its story, and the combat, and by the end of it, I hope to convey the message that even the most diehard of BioWare fans should be avoiding this game, not making the same mistake I did, giving EA money for this. So with that, let's get right into it. Starting with performance, what can I say? For reference sake, I have a pretty good PC. It can run most modern games at least 60 FPS, and that includes EA's own Apex Legends. And yet, Anthem runs absolutely terribly. I really did compare it to a slideshow earlier, and I think that holds true. At its worst, it is actually impossible to see what is happening on screen, which is a problem for a co-op-driven shooter like this. Even if you get lucky and launch Anthem in a good day, you'll be hit with a host of bugs, many of which have been present since launch date, and 3 months down the line, still haven't been fixed. It's baffling to me that they launched it in this state, and honestly, it feels like EA has ventured into the realm of early access with this title. Not to say that they haven't before. Looking at you again, Mass Effect Andromeda. I know that it's common for loot shooters such as this game to not be good at launch, have a whole host of issues like this, but eventually get worked on down the line to be a presentable product. It happened to Destiny 2, and I actually do play that game a lot with a lot of my friends. But the difference between a game like Destiny 2's buggy launch and a game like Anthem's buggy launch is that when Destiny 2 has time to polish itself up, you're left with the fast-paced shooting that Bungie is known for, and it's satisfying to play. But when you look at Anthem's core combat, you're left with a variation on Mass Effect Andromeda's Prime and Detonate gameplay. People praised that type of gameplay in Andromeda because they were comparing it to Mass Effect 2 and 3's style, which was a variation on Gears of War cover-based shooting. In comparison to that, Mass Effect Andromeda's Prime and Detonate was much more fast-paced. But in Anthem, we're not comparing it to Mass Effect 2 and 3. We have to compare it with its competition, Destiny 2, Division 2, and Warframe. Before I go more in-depth into the comparison, however, I want to explain the Prime and Detonate system for anybody who doesn't know. This system is defined with cooldown-based abilities, some of which will be called primers and others detonators. First, you hit your enemy with a primer ability, which will leave them open to massive damage when you hit them with its complementary detonator ability. It works decently fine for games such as Andromeda, where the combat isn't exactly the most important, but you want to have something serviceable to draw people in. But for a game like Anthem, it's a complete and total mismatch. The Prime and Detonate abilities really just don't work well in a looter shooter, and especially not one that is completely focused on cooperative combat with random multiplayer matchmaking. Unless you get lucky and have an entire team of people that are willing to talk to you and coordinate their actions, the Prime and Detonate system is just going to result in a random mess of primers and detonators being thrown around the arena. And while that's already a problem with the waves of low-level fodder you'll mostly be fighting, it becomes an even bigger problem against bosses or even mini-bosses that Anthem will throw at you, because it is entirely dependent on the Prime and Detonate system to deal damage to any of these enemies. During my live streams recording footage for this review, there were multiple main missions and even side missions that resulted in mini-bosses or bosses that almost completely ignored gunfire and relied exclusively on primers and detonators to deal any sort of damage. You can of course use your ultimate abilities to try and bypass this as best you can, but even those are pretty reliant on primers and detonators, and they honestly sometimes feel like they were thrown in as afterthoughts because other cooldown-based games have ultimate abilities. For instance, in my playtime, I played as a Storm Javelin and an Interceptor Javelin, and the Storm's ultimate was essentially just using ultimate versions of your elemental attacks, one at a time, until it was exhausted, while the Interceptors consisted of melee combat, but with far greater damage to your strikes. And while I'll give Storm credit for at least being essentially grand magic versions of your regular attacks, the Interceptor's ultimate ability is kind of a joke, based on the multiple times I've solved mini-boss fights by essentially running up to it and pressing the melee button as fast as I could. I'm not gonna say this is the worst combat experience I've ever had with a video game, but compared to its contemporaries, I find it sorely lacking in any depth. Both The Division 2 and Destiny 2 have far more in terms of combat customization to offer, and if all you want to do is customize a cool robot suit, well, Warframe can beat that out pretty easily too. With all this talk of primers and detonators and ultimates, you might be forgetting, what about gunplay combat? In a looter shooter, that should be the most important part, right? Well, unfortunately, BioWare didn't seem to think that that was true. Guns are consistently going to do the least amount of damage in your entire arsenal, and yet as a looter shooter, the majority of your playtime is going to be grinding out dungeons for more of those guns. Of course, you're also going to be grinding out for other parts of your arsenal, such as those primer and detonator abilities, but I find it really odd that the biggest drive of a looter shooter game, the shooting, is by far the weakest aspect of the game. By the way, the other half, the looter part of the looter shooter, is just as bad. But I'll be covering that later in the end section of the video, when I cover BioWare's post-launch support for this game and how they've dealt with topics such as this. But before we get to that point, I have to talk about the most important part of a BioWare game, the story. Well, that's not entirely true anymore, unfortunately. Although so far the combat and performance have been lackluster, I'd be willing to forgive that if they presented a solid story. After all, my favorite BioWare games, Mass Effect 1 and Dragon Age Origins, are not exactly the best in terms of gameplay, but it makes up for that in its phenomenal storytelling. And that's because BioWare was always focused on telling a compelling story that the player drives. Whether it be as your Commander Shepard choosing how they're going to save the galaxy, or your Grey Warden that has to rebuild their order from nothing and stop the Ancient Blight from returning. Both of these stories are defined by the storytelling that BioWare gives, as well as the leeway it allows for a player to determine their own path. And yet, in Anthem, that's pretty lacking. The entire story is determined from start to finish, and the only real impact you're going to have on it is the tone of voice that you're going to be delivering your lines in. I'll give you a brief synopsis of the story, and then I'll go into my own opinions on it. We start with your main character as an accomplished freelancer already, being thrown to the heart of rage, a horrible storm that hides the cenotaph, an ancient artifact left behind by the Shapers, the creators of this world. Just a quick lore thing to point out. Anthem's world was created by these Shapers, but before they finished the planet, they left thousands of years before the story takes place. As a result, Anthem's planet is an unfinished mess with spontaneous artifacts that will pop up connected to the Anthem of Creation. These artifacts will spontaneously activate, doing whatever they want, seemingly unconnected to the laws of reality. Such effects as spawning giant storms out of nowhere that last for multiple years, as well as creating life from nothing. It's honestly quite a fitting metaphor for the state of the game, an unfinished mess abandoned by its creators and released into the wild. And by the end of this story, we will have received no explanation on how these work or how any of this came to be. I think it's important to put that at the beginning, because otherwise none of this story is going to make any sense, not that it really does anyways. Your freelancer is going into the Heart of Rage with their teammates, Haluk and Faye, in an attempt to shut down the Heart of Rage now before it's too late. The enemy faction of this game, the Dominion, invaded the city of Freemark and activated the Cenotaph, hoping to tap into the Anthem of Creation. Instead, it wiped out their entire army, and it activates the Heart of Rage, destroying the entire city of Freemark. Our attempt to go in leads to disaster, we lose, and a lot of freelancers are wiped out, leading your home nation of Bastion to start distrusting freelancers, seeing as they couldn't get the job done. Just a quick aside, I find it interesting that the Dominion is portrayed as evil because they are an empire, but at the same time, your nation of Bastion is also an empire. I'm not saying it's a bad thing that you're in an empire, I'm just saying that it's odd that your main criticism of your enemy faction is that they are an empire. So after that failure, your team breaks up and we have a 2-year time skip. You get to choose what your character looks like through about 30 presets, depending on which gender you choose. Gone is the old BioWare staple of a complete character customizer. You are now on the bottom of the rung, teamed up with a cipher named Owen and taking out menial jobs. By the way, ciphers are psychic individuals that help freelancers in their jobs, although we don't exactly see how. The most important job that your freelancer takes is silencing artifacts, making sure that incidents such as the Heart of Rage don't happen again. This process of sealing these unknown ancient devices is flying around in your javelin suit, collecting golden orbs that float in the air, and putting them onto the artifact. Riveting, I know. But that doesn't really happen too often in-game, as you immediately start in the main plot. The Dominion is back. After 2 years spent licking their wounds and getting better, they want to take the cenotaph again and re-find the Anthem of Creation. Their only problem is that the Heart of Rage has developed to the point where no javelin can get past it, as the intense winds will tear up their suits immediately. I want you to keep that in mind for later because that's going to be very important. Obviously, you don't want them to do that again, so your government assigns you the task to stop it. But the only way to stop it is to beat them to the artifact and silence it before they ever get a chance to use it. You're presented with the same problem that they are, namely, you can't get inside of the Heart of Rage. However, the antagonists have a new figure to try and help them out on that, called the Monitor. He's interesting because he is both a javelin pilot and a psychic at once, being able to use both of their powers to their greatest extent, and his main goal is trying to access the Anthem of Creation directly, using his psychic powers to influence it. What motivation does he have to do this? We don't really know because he never really explains it, and nobody else will. It's determined that we aren't going to be able to do this alone, so we're tasked with finding our 2 old squad mates, Haluk and Faye. We track them down at a generic Outcast bar, making a deal for supplies with a character that honestly feels like they're ripped straight out of Borderlands 2. You meet them, you get ambushed by the Dominion, you get out, and now your party's back together. So now that they're all back together, we have to figure out how to get past the Heart of Rage, proper. The idea that they come up with is to get a suit worn by the legendary General Tarsus that was rumored to have abilities surpassing any suit known today. And, I have to admit, this right here is actually where I stopped playing the game. Originally I was planning on completely finishing the game before doing a review, but they added something at this part of the game that left me so genuinely disappointed that I just couldn't keep going.
I took a look at the intel Zim gave us.
It's no good.
She promised us 1 location. She delivered 5.
Oh, God.
Guardians and 4 tombs that must be visited to find the Javelin of Dawn.
No.
Data's barely readable. I'll try to get more out of it while you
Oh,
look
no.
for these tombs.
Right. Send me the locations. I'll check them out.
No. Legionnaire's Trial? What is a Legionnaire's Trial? In order to find General Tarsus's suit, what you need to do first is unlock its location, and the only way to do that is to unlock 4 separate temples. The only way to unlock each one of those temples is to do 3 separate challenges, and those challenges can only be completed by grinding out free play missions. In terms of gameplay, the only thing that I can honestly compare it to is the Triforce hunting quest in Wind Waker. Let me tell you, that's not a good thing to be compared to. At all. Later on, a friend told me that they patched it so it would track these missions from the moment you start the game, but they didn't in the version that I played. So the only way to progress the story was to grind unsatisfying combat for hours at a time, hoping that I would eventually get all of the locations. And that's already bad enough. But the biggest problem is, it's not hard to actually find the location you need to look for. General Tarsus's suit was buried with her, and so you have to find a temple named after her. The Temple of Tarsus. They say that that location has been lost to time and you'll never be able to find it, so the only way to find it is to go to each of these temples, find part of a code, have it all decoded, and then go to the temple. But do you know where it actually is? It's pretty much right next door to the city that you live in. It's in a location known as the Valley of Tarsus. Who would have thought? And it's barely even hidden, being right next to a giant waterfall that you pass next to with a man-made bridge. This is a man-made route. And it's right there, and they really expect me to believe that freelancers, whose whole thing is flying and exploring on their javelin suits, would never actually take the time to look into the Valley of Tarsus to see if Tarsus's tomb was there. Honestly, the most amazing part is that you can go into that tomb in free play. There are no barriers to entry that the temples are keeping you from using. In fact, the only barriers in the actual mission where you go to the temple are little puzzle segments that don't exist in the temple in free play. You can go farther into the temple without hitting an obstacle in free play than you can in the mission, and the only reason that you can't complete the mission right there is because they put in a wall that you can't get past that doesn't exist in the canon mission. I'll be honest with you, that broke me. I said that I was done right there, fed up with it, and quit the game. So the rest of the story that I'm going to be telling you come from an online synopsis of the story as well as in-game cutscenes that were posted. But you don't really have to worry, because there wasn't that much anyways. As it turns out, the reason why they had to put in a point to make you grind for at least a day to get all of this was because you had already hit the halfway point of the story. So once you get all of those temples unlocked and go to the real temple, you participate in a series of trials that end in you getting the suit. But then you're hit with a twist. As it turns out, your cipher, Owen, followed you into the temple and betrayed you, shocking you and stealing the suit. The reason why is because he wants to be a javelin pilot, but it's taking too long to train, so he got really frustrated. Instead of waiting about 2 years to go through his training, he made a deal with the Monitor to join up with him and get him the cenotaph in exchange for the suit of legend. Even though he doesn't know how to pilot, he's able to use it anyways because the suit's just so good it makes up for that. So while your boy Owen goes to make a deal with the Monitor, you participate in a filler mission that involves a scientist getting split into 3 different parts by a random artifact, each part representing a different part of his personality. They start dying because you're not supposed to do that to a person, and it turns out that the way to keep them from dying is to slam the artifact on the ground, which stabilizes them. As soon as that filler mission is over, the scientist creates a device that allows you to go into the heart of the rage without needing a super suit. All you need is a part of the suit that develops a force field that you can use. Luckily, you're able to get that part from Owen because he came back after he didn't know how to use the suit, causing him to drop his shield when they were going into the Heart of Rage, killing the entire force that went with him. Needless to say, the Monitor wasn't very happy about this, so he scarred his face and told him to go away. Owen comes to us, gets a bit pouty, gives us the shield part, and then leaves, saying that he wants to forge his own path. So without much meaningful action on our part, we now have the means to get within the Heart of Rage, and we do so immediately. But unfortunately, the Monitor has decided to beat us to it and went anyways without the shield, saying that he will sacrifice as many men as he needs to so that he can get it. So in the end, he does beat us to the cenotaph and uses its powers to jack into the Anthem of Creation, becoming the series equivalent to a god. But luckily, we're able to beat him by shooting him in the face and activating Prime and Detonate abilities enough that his health bar goes down. And just as he's about to activate his super on us and destroy us for our insolence, surprise! Halleck and Faye arrive in their armored transport vehicle, which for some reason is a cross between an AT-AT and a camel, and just ram into the Monitor like it's Grand Theft Auto 5, killing him instantly. And when I saw that cutscene, I pretty much knew that the writers of Anthem had no idea what they were doing. So they spent this entire time telling us that the Heart of Rage was inaccessible to anybody, that it would tear them apart, that you needed this grand shield of all shields to get into it. But then, right at the end, because they wrote themselves into a corner, it turns out that the weakest of transport vehicles, that is standard equipment for the entire army, can actually make it through just fine. And it's not like this is some special protagonist vehicle that only we could use. It's standard. In fact, it's worse. Halleck spends multiple times showing how it's on the point that it's gonna break down and just be done. And yet the Monitor, for 2 years of scheming and trying to understand how to get in, didn't think to just use an armored personnel carrier, walk right through the Heart of Rage with it, grab the cenotaph, and then boom, he's a god. Everything that we worked for up to this point was essentially meaningless because we could have just gone in the entire time. Every part of the plot that involved getting ready to go in, worthless. But whatever, it's almost done, and honestly, I want to be done with this game and not spend any more time bragging on just how bad its story is. So you go to the cenotaph, it's going unstable, Faye goes in and uses her cipher powers to fix it, and the game is over. You won. It's done. And it honestly left me feeling incredibly disappointed to even see it. This is BioWare, a studio that built up its reputation for over a decade of incredible story writing, from the Knights of the Old Republic to Mass Effect to Dragon Age, even older titles like Baldur's Gate, renowned for how great their story was in spite of any gameplay foibles that it might have had. But now we're off about a decade of failure after failure from the studio, starting with Dragon Age 2 and its incredible rush job, to Mass Effect 3's failure to give a satisfying conclusion to a trilogy people loved, The Dragon Age Inquisition and its incredibly polarizing gameplay and story, and then Mass Effect Andromeda's attempt to bring the series back only to be met with a horrifying failure of bugs and inconsequential story. I'll be real with you. Everything was riding on Anthem for a lot of people. This was BioWare's last make-it-or-break-it chance to restore the faith that people had in their storytelling. They worked on this game for 7 years, and all that came out of that was this? A loot and shooter with barely any shooting in it, combat that's incredibly repetitive, where the only meaningful damage to any important enemy comes from the prime and detonate system being spammed, where its performance is so bad even high-end PCs can barely run it at 30 FPS. A game so unoptimized that when it launched, people's PS4s were getting bricked because they played this? And to top it all off, a story that completely abandons any sense of you having an impact on the world? A setting so poorly developed that almost everything in the plot can be defined by, we don't know what causes it, but we have to deal with it? And the characters aren't doing anything to make up for it. Pretty much everybody can be generously described as a cut of cardboard. After all, the villain's main motive is, I just want to do it because I want to be powerful. This is from the studio that made the Reapers, the studio that made Saren, the studio that made Darth Revan, for God's sake. And this is the best that they could come up with? I just want power? And your supporting cast isn't any better. Faye doesn't really say anything besides words of encouragement. Haluk's just disappointed and bitter, and then he gets over it because you say a good word to him every once in a while. And Owen, oh god, Owen. Your best friend, he stuck with you for thick and thin, but then you meet your old friends, get along with him for a day, and he gets so bitter that he leaves and joins his mortal enemies. If it hasn't been made pretty clear to you by now, pretty much all of the good writing talent at BioWare has left, and any that still remains have just been hampered down by management that doesn't understand what they're making. And I'm not even talking about EA on this one, although I'm not going to say that they're any good for the company. I'm just talking about their core management, BioWare Studio itself. And that right there is going to bring us into the final part of this video, talking about the post-release support and the post-release revelations that have come to us about Anthem's development and the studio behind it. At the time of this video, it's been about 3 months since Anthem launched. I can't say that anything good has come of the game since. Sure, all of this was bad, especially the writing, but a lot of it could be fixed with some proper post-release support. We've seen that happen with a bunch of other games. Its direct competitor Destiny 2 was a buggy mess at launch, it was filled with problems, and yet a few months after launch, they fixed a lot of the problems in that game. The community was really happy with it. There's tens of thousands of people playing it every day to this day. It's vibrant, it's active, it's got a long life ahead of it, and that's not even counting whatever sequel might come out of it. And then a competitor to both of them, Warframe, went through pretty much the exact same thing as Destiny 2. But because it's a free-to-play game and they fixed all of those problems, it's even bigger. The community is massive, they're pretty content, and if problems ever pop up, their devs are pretty fast at fixing them. And then we have Anthem. 3 months since launch, and pretty much every single problem that I described with the gameplay is still there. Every performance issue is pretty much still there. The post-launch support has been dominated by community outrage over the absurdly low rewards that you get for the end-game rating called Strongholds. In that gameplay mode, you and 3 other Javelins go out into a dungeon, raid for anywhere between a half an hour to an hour, and hopefully you get good gear that'll allow you to get even stronger. But the problem is, most of the hardcore raiding community of that game, its lifeblood for longevity, has said that it is completely out of whack. The drop rates for the best gear are absurdly low, to the point where people put in actual days of grinding and never see anything that's really better than what they already have. It was so bad that even a developer for Diablo 3, a game that had this exact same problem with loot at the start of its life cycle, came into Anthem's subreddit and tried to tell the developers how they could fix this like they fixed it in their game. A developer or two dropped by, they said they appreciated what they were hearing, and then they ignored it completely. Even the most hardcore fans in that Anthem subreddit were so upset that people were dropping the game left and right as soon as the Division 2 came out. BioWare initially started responding to them in there, but as time went on, they started responding less and less. Hey, just a quick update from Future Turing here. BioWare actually did make a post in the subreddit community just about an hour or so after I finished recording this, and they said, a few quality of life updates, a new stronghold, but all of the core problems are still there, and they've talked about how they aren't going to be posting as much anymore. So while they did drop off, they are technically still posting, just to update that, but mostly the core situation remains the same. Wanted to update to make sure that it was right. And most recently, as of the making of this video, a Kotaku article writer, Jason Schreier, made an in-depth article looking into the development of Anthem. And let me tell you, it revealed a lot about the state of this game and why I don't expect it to get any better. Even though I'm not one to recommend Kotaku, I actually do recommend that you go read this article because it's just that damn good. Jason found out that despite having ostensibly 7 years to make this game, almost all of it was made in the last 18 months of development, because nobody in the studio could decide what they wanted to make. A major feature that was advertised in the game, Flight, was taken in and out of development so many times that it's hard to count, and in the end it became so unimportant that I didn't even talk about it in this review. Mere months before the game came out, top talent such as writers, producers, developers were leaving the company en masse because they just couldn't stand the management anymore. And now all of that was exposed to the public with this article. People were reading it, reacting to it, wanting to see how BioWare and EA would respond to it. And in the end, EA put out a presser telling them that everything was fine and that they didn't want to hear this harassment of their developers. They actually called this harassment of their developers, and then BioWare sent out an email to all of its developers telling them to stop talking to the press. Honestly, it's just too much to take sometimes, you know? Alright, so I think it's about time that we start to wrap up this video. If somehow my opinion hasn't been made clear to you yet, I'll tell you right now, don't buy Anthem. I'm begging you, don't spend your money on this game. Don't reward this horrible, horrible game. And if you're one of the people still playing it who already bought in and think that they have a sunken cost and they want to see it to the end, you really don't need to keep going. Outside of a situation like Final Fantasy XIV where the entire game is dropped and they rework it from scratch, I don't think this game will ever develop into the game that its fanbase wants it to be, or the game its developers want it to be. Because in the end of the day, that's the core problem with Anthem. It doesn't know what it wants to be. Even if they went above and beyond my expectations for what their post-launch support is going to be. If they made it so that this game ran perfectly fine on the specs that it's supposed to run on at launch. If they made it so that the loot systems actually gave you good loot. If they removed the tedious grinding from the game that means that you have to spend an entire day killing mooks to try and get through the story. Even if they made it that guns actually did damage against mini-bosses or bosses and weren't just there to clear out the random mooks. Even if they did all of that, I don't think this game would be very good. Even with all of that, it wouldn't hold a candle to its competition. Destiny 2 and The Division 2 offer far better gameplay and customization options. And by customization, I'm not just talking about how many grain effects you can put on your suit, I'm talking about how your character actually plays. And Warframe's been here since before all of them. It's got stuff down that Anthem wishes that it could do. Even pre-launch, they would talk about how Anthem's javelins were going to be fashion-framed, a line taken straight from the Warframe community's mouth. In the best of circumstances, I honestly don't see how this could ever compete with any of them. If you want to play in a cool suit, you can play Warframe. If you want fast-paced action, you can play Destiny. If you want a story that will really entice you, you'll also play Destiny. Isn't that crazy? Bungie's games have a better story than BioWare's now. And so does Ubisoft. Ubisoft has a better story than BioWare. And before this video ends, I just want to say, I didn't want to make this video so negative. I wanted this game to be a good game. I expected it to fail since the beginning, but I really wanted it to subvert my expectations on that. I've been a BioWare fan since Mass Effect. I went back and I played their old games and I fell in love with them. I still think that Dragon Age Origins is one of the best RPGs ever made, up there with games like Planescape Torment. But it's been a decade since those games really caught my interest. It's been an entire decade of failed game after failed game. And it's only gotten worse. And you can put a lot of that blame on EA, of course you can. They rushed Dragon Age 2, they rushed Mass Effect 3, they forced them to start developing on Frostbite, an engine that was never made for these games. And look at how that turned out. Dragon Age Inquisition looks like they put a whole layer of grease over everything, and Mass Effect Andromeda just straight up doesn't work. But at the same time, I can't just say that if they uprooted and left EA right now, everything would go back to the way it was. Even though Frostbite as an engine didn't help them make their games, you would think that after enough time using it, they'd get used to how those development engines work. But as Jason Schreier revealed in his article, they never shared any of the info on how to use Frostbite between studios. And by studios, I'm not talking about other studios like EA's DICE. I'm talking about BioWare with other BioWare studios. BioWare Montreal didn't have any of the tools that were used to make Dragon Age Inquisition when they made their game. And apparently Anthem barely had any assets from Dragon Age Inquisition or Mass Effect Andromeda to make theirs. And again, they had 7 years to make this game, and in the end, with 18 months left to go, they pretty much had nothing. It's incredible. So I'd like to end the video with a phrase that came from that infamous Kotaku article. There was a saying in BioWare Edmonton's main studio that they called BioWare magic. The idea was that even though production would look like a mess so deep in, as long as they all put in some elbow grease and had faith that it would work out, it would all work out in the end. Apparently they had this phrase going in the time of Dragon Age Origins, of Mass Effect, of all these games that were rushed but in the end came out to be glowing masterpieces. But that BioWare magic just doesn't seem to be working anymore. Mass Effect Andromeda relied on it, and it led to the death of BioWare Montreal. Anthem relied on it too, and look at what came out of that. This horrible mess of a game that you can barely call a BioWare game without laughing. A lot of the old guard at BioWare, whichever ones are still left at BioWare, are probably looking at themselves and wondering what happened. Why isn't BioWare magic working anymore? What happened that made it all work, and why is it gone? I can't claim to be an expert, but I can at least try and give what advice I have. That kind of attitude works when your company has a united vision, a united goal that they're working towards. And even then, I wouldn't say that it's the best thing to rely on. But look at BioWare now. Can you really call that a united vision anymore? Half of the studio is working in Edmonton, Canada, and the other half is working down in Austin, Texas. And none of them are talking to each other. BioWare Austin devs have gone on record talking about how frustrated they were because they just couldn't understand what Edmonton was doing with the game. And Edmonton was very loath to talk to them about it, because they saw themselves as the original studio, the better studio, and Austin should just learn their place. They saw Austin as just a support studio that couldn't know how to make a real game, even though they had years of experience with an MMO that had a continuing life service just like this game would. And even in the Edmonton studio itself, it was fractured, nobody could understand what they were doing. It seems like every department was working on their own game, and nobody understood how it would all match up in the end. But they just kept going with it, because why would they ever have to change how they were working? BioWare magic would save them. It saved them before, and it would do it again, right? It didn't. It just didn't. Because that kind of unifying vision that saved them time and time again is gone from their company. And I think it's time for BioWare to start realizing that the BioWare magic is fading. And if they don't wake up, understand what went wrong, and try and learn from their mistakes, it will probably just go out. After all, EA's killed off studios for way less. Maxis Entertainment's dead, Pandemic's dead. Even in the last year, Visceral Entertainment is dead. So BioWare, try and get that vision back. Try and learn from your mistakes. And if you can't, then I think the fans just have to understand that maybe the BioWare magic that we used to love is already gone, and we should move on with it. Thank you for watching. I'm Turing, and if you managed to sit through this entire video, I'm happy that you listened. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and please, if you have the time, play something you'll enjoy.